Hello, I am the Cave Junkie, and today we're going to be reading Chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Chamber and the Sorcerer's Stone. You better stop. Okay, so right there. Chapter 1. Lay down. Zayna, lay down. You need to quit playing and you need to lay down. Alright. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dudley, number 4 Privet Drive, were proud to say they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in any strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde, and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son named Dudley, and in their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. If you don't stop playing, I'm going to take that.
No.
Then listen to the story and go to sleep, okay? They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter and Mrs. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met in several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think that what neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never even seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on a dull gray Tuesday, our story starts. Lay down.
I'll go back.
Nope. You were being annoying, and now you need to lay down. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. No, you need to lay down.
No, I'll go pee.
You're being annoying. Go pee. Go. Just go. Go. Go away. Very annoying. Should I pause the story for you? I guess we need to wait. Oh. Alright. Yeah.
The battery thing that was plugged into went bad, so that's why.
All right.
A new one on it.
You better hurry up. Come lay down.
Now you play fit.
Actually, you're gonna lay down. Come on, you had me pause the story. I'm making a video. Come lay down. Man, when you plop down, I was trying to fix the sheet. I'll just fix the sheet later. Lay down. I said lay down. Alright, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large, tawny cat flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. "Little tyke!" chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again, and there was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive. But there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? Get this out of my face. You hear me?
Mm-hmm.
What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Pivot Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove toward town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jams, he couldn't help noticing there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes. The get-ups you saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on the huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. Lay down. Where was it? They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was. And wearing an emerald green cloak? The nerve of him! But then it struck Mr. Dursley that he was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Zane, lay down. Now.
Lie down, baby. I'll give you a hug and a kiss in a moment, okay?
Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings parking lot, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Lay down. No, you're not. You need to put your head on the pillow and lay down like a normal person. Because you're being annoying.
I want to like a baby.
What?
I want to like a baby.
Then lay down. Babies, lay down. You're being very annoying. Please stop. Now, where was I? I have to find where I was again. Okay. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the bakery. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This bunch were whispering excitedly, too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag. Then he caught a few words that they were saying. The Potters, that's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son, Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried to his office, snapped at